Emily was a fighter. Life hadn't been easy for her, but she never let it break her spirit. A single mother in her late 20s, she worked long hours at an upscale restaurant in the heart of Manhattan. The job wasn't glamorous. She spent most of her shifts rushing between tables, balancing trays full of expensive dishes and dealing with demanding customers. But it paid the bills. Barely. Every penny she earned went toward keeping a roof over her head and food on the table for her 6-year-old daughter, Lily. Lily was Emily's whole world. She had big, curious eyes that sparkled like sunlight on water, and a laugh so infectious it could light up even the gloomiest days. But raising a child alone while working grueling hours wasn't easy. On most days, Emily relied on Mrs. Dawson, their elderly neighbor, to watch Lily after school. It wasn't ideal, but it worked, until today. That morning, as Emily tied her apron strings and prepared for another busy shift, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Mrs. Dawson. "Sorry, dear. I've come down with something. Can't take care of Lily today." Emily's stomach dropped. She stared at the message, panic creeping in. What was she supposed to do? Calling in sick wasn't an option. Not when rent was due next week. Asking for time off would mean losing tips, maybe even risking her job. She glanced at Lily, who sat coloring quietly at the kitchen table. Her tiny hands gripped the crayons tightly and her tongue stuck out slightly in concentration. Emily sighed. There was only one thing to do. She knelt beside her daughter and brushed a strand of hair away from her face. "Hey, sweetheart," she said softly. "How would you like to come to work with Mommy today?" Lily looked up, her eyes wide with excitement. "Really? To the fancy restaurant?" Emily smiled despite herself. "Yes, but there are rules. You have to stay quiet, okay? No running around or bothering the guests. We'll find a nice spot for you near the kitchen where no one will see you." Lily nodded eagerly, promising to be good. With a heavy heart, Emily packed a small bag with snacks, coloring books, and toys to keep her entertained. As they walked to the subway station, hand in hand, Emily couldn't shake the feeling of dread building inside her. Bringing a child to work was risky, especially in a place like this. The restaurant catered to New York City's elite, the kind of people who expected perfection. One wrong move, and she could lose everything. When they arrived, the hostess greeted Emily with a knowing smile. "Rough day?" she asked, nodding toward Lily. "You have no idea," Emily muttered under her breath. She quickly found a quiet corner near the kitchen and set Lily up with her things. "Stay here, okay? If you need anything, just wave and I'll come over." For the first hour, everything went smoothly. Emily juggled orders, refilled drinks, and made sure her tables were happy. Occasionally, she'd glance over at Lily, who seemed content scribbling pictures and munching on crackers. For a moment, she allowed herself to relax. Maybe this wouldn't be so bad after all. But then, disaster struck. As Emily cleared plates from a nearby table, she heard the unmistakable sound of tiny feet scampering across the floor. She turned just in time to see Lily darting toward the center of the dining room. Her blood ran cold. Before she could react, Lily stopped at a table occupied by a man in a sharp suit, typing furiously on his laptop. Without hesitation, she threw her arms around him and shouted, "Daddy!" The entire restaurant fell silent. Forks clattered against plates. Conversations halted, and every pair of eyes turned toward the scene. Emily froze, her tray slipping slightly in her grasp. Oh no, this couldn't be happening. The man looked down at the little girl clinging to him, his expression unreadable. He blinked once, twice, then finally spoke. "Do I know you?" His voice was calm, almost gentle, but Emily felt like the ground beneath her feet had crumbled away. Heart pounding, she rushed over, grabbing Lily by the shoulders and pulling her back. "I'm so sorry," she stammered, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. "She must have mistaken you for someone else." The man studied her carefully, his piercing gaze making her feel even more exposed. Something about him seemed familiar, though Emily couldn't quite place it. He was handsome, yes, but there was also an air of authority about him, a confidence that commanded attention. And those eyes, they looked eerily similar to Lily's. As Emily tried to explain, stumbling over her words, the man leaned back in, his chair, his interest piqued. Whatever he was thinking, he didn't say it aloud. Instead, he simply nodded and returned to his meal, dismissing the incident, for now. But deep down, Emily knew this was far from over. Emily's mind raced as she pulled Lily back to their makeshift corner near the kitchen. Her heart was still pounding, and she could feel the weight of everyone's stares even though the restaurant had returned to its usual hum of activity. She knelt down in front of her daughter, trying to keep her voice steady but firm. "Lily, what were you thinking? You can't just run up to strangers like that." Lily looked up at her with wide, innocent eyes. "But Mommy, it was him," she insisted, pointing toward the man in the suit. "He feels like Daddy." Emily sighed, running a hand through her hair. How do you explain to a 6-year-old that sometimes life is messy and complicated, and that not every man who looks kind or familiar is her father? She hugged Lily tightly, whispering, "Sweetheart, I know you miss having a dad around, but that man isn't your daddy. Okay? Let's not bother him anymore." Lily didn't argue, but Emily could tell she wasn't entirely convinced. Still, the little girl nodded and went back to coloring quietly. For now, the crisis seemed contained, but Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was about to unfold. Later that evening, after the dinner rush had slowed and most of the guests had left, Emily found herself face to face with the man again. He approached her cautiously as she cleared dishes from a nearby table. Up close, he looked even more imposing. Tall, broad-shouldered, with an aura of quiet confidence that made her feel small and vulnerable. "Can we talk for a moment?" he asked, his tone polite but direct. There was no judgment in his voice, only curiosity. Emily hesitated, glancing around to make sure no one was watching. "Sure," she said finally, leading him to a secluded part of the restaurant where they wouldn't be overheard. "Look, I'm really sorry about earlier. My daughter, she gets excited sometimes and she must have mistaken you for someone else." The man studied her carefully, his sharp gaze making her squirm. "You seem awfully defensive for someone whose kid made a simple mistake," he said slowly. "Is there something you're not telling me?" Emily opened her mouth to deny it, but the words caught in her throat. Something about the way he looked at her, those piercing blue eyes, so much like Lily's, made her pause. She swallowed, hard trying to think of a way to deflect the conversation. "It's nothing, really. Kids have wild imaginations, you know how it is." To her surprise, he chuckled softly. "Actually, I don't. I've never had kids, but if I did, I'd want to know everything about them." His expression softened slightly, and for the first time, Emily saw a flicker of vulnerability behind his polished exterior. "Listen, I don't mean to pry, but there's something about your daughter that feels familiar, like I've seen her before." Emily's stomach churned. She wanted to dismiss his words, to laugh them off as coincidence, but deep down she knew better. This man wasn't just some random stranger. He was Daniel Hartley, billionaire entrepreneur and founder of one of the largest tech companies in the world. And 5 years ago, during a brief stint as a temp worker at his corporate office, she'd crossed paths with him under circumstances she'd rather forget. Taking a deep breath, Emily decided to come clean, or at least partially. "Okay, fine," she admitted reluctantly. "Maybe Lily thought you looked familiar because—" She trailed off, unsure how to continue. "Because why?" he prompted gently, leaning forward slightly. "Because she might have seen pictures of you online." Emily lied quickly. It wasn't the truth, but it was close enough to buy her some time. "She loves looking at magazines and stuff, and she probably recognized you from there." Daniel raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. "Pictures online? That seems like a stretch. Most kids her age are more interested in cartoons than business tycoons." Emily forced a laugh, though it sounded hollow even to her own ears. "Well, she's a smart kid, always has been." For a moment, Daniel simply stared at her, as if trying to read her thoughts. Then, to her relief, he nodded. "All right, fair enough. But just so you know, I'd still like to meet her properly, if she's comfortable, of course." Emily's heart sank. This was exactly what she'd hoped to avoid. A situation where Daniel got too close, asked too many questions, or worse, started piecing things together. But she also knew refusing outright would raise even more suspicion. "I'll think about it," she said evasively. "Thanks for understanding." As he walked away, Emily slumped against the wall, letting out a shaky breath. She should have known this wouldn't end here. Daniel wasn't the type of man to let things go easily, especially when something, or someone, piqued his interest. And judging by the way he'd reacted to Lily, he wasn't going to stop until he got answers. That night, as Emily tucked Lily into bed, she couldn't help but wonder how long she could keep the truth hidden. Lily lay curled up beneath the blankets, clutching her favorite stuffed animal. "Mommy, do you think that man will come back tomorrow?" she asked sleepily. "I don't know, sweetheart," Emily replied, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's forehead. "But if he does, we'll figure it out together, okay?" Lily smiled, closing her eyes. "Okay. Good night, Mommy." "Good night, my love." As Emily turned off the light and closed the bedroom door behind her, she felt a lump form in her throat. Keeping secrets from Daniel was one thing, but lying to Lily, the one person who trusted her completely, felt unbearable. Deep down, she knew the truth would come out eventually. The question was when, and how would it change all their lives forever? The next morning, Emily woke up with a heavy heart. She had barely slept, her mind replaying the events of the previous day over and over again. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Lily running toward Daniel, heard her sweet voice calling him Daddy. It wasn't just embarrassing, it was dangerous. Dangerous because Daniel was starting to ask questions and Emily knew she couldn't keep dodging them forever. As she got ready for work, she tried to focus on practical things. Packing Lily's snacks, choosing an outfit that looked professional yet comfortable, and mentally preparing herself for another long shift at the restaurant. But no matter how hard she tried to distract herself, one thought kept creeping back into her mind. What if Daniel figured it out? What if he realized the truth about Lily? By the time they reached the restaurant, Emily felt like she was walking into a minefield. She glanced around nervously as they entered, half expecting to see Daniel already seated at his usual table. To her relief, he wasn't there. Not yet, anyway. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that he'd show up sooner or later. And, when he did, she needed to be ready. Sure enough, Daniel arrived just before lunchtime. He walked in with the same air of confidence he always carried, dressed in a tailored suit that screamed success. Emily's stomach tightened as she watched him scan the room, his gaze eventually landing on her. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and she quickly looked away, pretending to busy herself with setting tables, but avoiding him wasn't going to work this time. A few minutes later, he approached her, holding a folded piece of paper in his hand. "Can we talk?" he asked, his tone calm but insistent. Emily hesitated, glancing around to make sure none of her coworkers were paying attention. "I'm working right now," she said quietly. "Maybe later?" Daniel shook his head. "This is important. Just 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." Reluctantly, Emily nodded and led him to a quiet corner near the kitchen. As soon as they were alone, he held out the piece of paper. "I took the liberty of arranging a DNA test," he said matter-of-factly. "It's discreet, completely confidential, and it'll give us answers once and for all." Emily stared at him, stunned. "You what? You can't just—" "I can," he interrupted gently but firmly. "Look, I know you're hesitant and I understand why, but I need to know the truth for my sake and for hers." "For her sake?" Emily echoed, her voice rising slightly. "She's my daughter. You don't get to swoop in here after 6 years and act like you care." Daniel flinched, taken aback by her outburst. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, in a softer tone, he said, "I may not have been there for her until now, but that doesn't mean I don't want to be. If she's mine, and something tells me she is, I owe it to both of you to step up, don't I?" Emily didn't answer right away. Instead, she sank onto a nearby chair, feeling overwhelmed by the weight of his words. Part of her wanted to lash out to tell him he had no right to barge into their lives after all these years. But another part A deeper, quieter part knew he was right. Lily deserved to know her father, and whether Emily liked it or not, Daniel seemed determined to fill that role. "Fine," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "We'll do the test, but if it turns out you're not her father, you leave us alone, no more questions, no more interference, deal?" Daniel nodded. "Deal." Over the next few days, Emily found herself constantly on edge, waiting for the results. She tried to focus on her job and spend quality time with Lily, but her mind kept drifting back to Daniel. Who was he, really? Was he the cold, calculating businessman everyone talked about? Or was there more to him than met the eye? And if he truly was Lily's father, how would that change their lives? Meanwhile, Daniel made an effort to stay in touch. He called the restaurant twice to check in, sending flowers one day with a note that simply read, "Thinking of you both." At first, Emily dismissed the gesture as a PR move, something a man like him would do to soften the blow before dropping a bombshell. But as the days went by, she began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, he genuinely cared. When the results finally came in, Emily's hands trembled as she opened the envelope. She read the report 3 times, each word sinking in deeper than the last. There was no denying it. The test confirmed that Daniel was indeed Lily's biological father. Her first instinct was to panic. How was she supposed to tell Lily? How was she supposed to explain to her little girl that the man she'd hugged in the restaurant was actually her daddy? And what about Daniel? Would he try to take Lily away from her? The thought made her chest tighten with fear. But as much as she dreaded the conversation, she knew she couldn't put it off. That evening, after tucking Lily into bed, Emily sat down beside her and took a deep breath. "Sweetheart," she began gently, "do you remember the man you hugged at the restaurant?" Lily's eyes lit up. "Yes, the one who feels like Daddy." "Well," Emily paused, searching for the right words. "It turns out he is your daddy, your real daddy." For a moment, Lily just stared at her, processing the news. Then, a huge smile spread across her face. "Really? Does that mean he'll come play with me?" Tears welled up in Emily's eyes as she nodded. "Yes, sweetheart. He wants to be part of your life. And Mommy will make sure everything works out okay, I promise." As Lily drifted off to sleep, hugging her stuffed animal tightly, Emily sat by her bedside, lost in thought. This was only the beginning. From here on out, nothing would ever be the same. The days following the DNA test results felt like a whirlwind for Emily. She hadn't told Daniel yet. She wanted to prepare herself, and more importantly, Lily, before letting him into their lives fully. But Daniel wasn't the kind of man who waited patiently. 2 days after she received the confirmation, he showed up at the restaurant again, this time with an air of urgency that made her stomach churn. "Emily," he said as soon as she approached his table, his tone softer than usual but firm, "we need to talk." She hesitated, glancing around nervously. The lunch rush was just winding down, and the staff was busy cleaning up. Still, she knew she couldn't avoid him forever. With a deep breath, she nodded and led him to the same quiet corner near the kitchen where they'd spoken before. "I got the results," she admitted quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "And you're right. Lily is your daughter." Daniel's expression didn't change immediately, but Emily could see the flicker of emotion in his eyes, shock, relief, and something else she couldn't quite place. Maybe it was guilt, or maybe it was hope. Whatever it was, it softened his features, making him look less like the billionaire tycoon everyone feared and more like a man simply trying to figure out his next move. "I see," he said finally, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. He leaned back against the wall, rubbing his temples as if trying to process everything. "I should have been there for her, for both of you. I can't change the past, but I can make things right moving forward." Emily crossed her arms, feeling defensive despite his calm demeanor. "What does that mean exactly? What do you want from us?" Daniel looked at her, his gaze unwavering. "I want to be part of her life, properly. That means spending time with her, getting to know her, being a father, not just some stranger who shows up every now and then. And financially, I'll take care of whatever you need. You won't have to struggle anymore. Emily's first instinct was to push back. She had spent years building a life for herself and Lily on her own terms, and the idea of someone stepping in, even if it was Lily's father, felt invasive. You think throwing money at us fixes everything? She snapped, her voice rising slightly. This isn't about what you owe us. It's about what's best for Lily. I agree, Daniel replied quickly, holding up his hands in a gesture of peace. That's why I'm not just talking about money. I want to build a relationship with her, with both of you. But I also know how hard it must have been for you, raising her alone all these years. Let me help, please. His words caught her off guard. There was sincerity in his voice, a vulnerability that made her pause. For so long she had imagined this moment, the moment when Daniel would find out about Lily. And in her mind, he had always been the villain, the rich, absent father who didn't care enough to stick around. But now, sitting across from him, she wasn't sure what to think. Was he genuinely sorry? Did he really want to make amends? Or was this just another phase, one that would fade once the novelty wore off? Before she could respond, Daniel added, I'm not asking for anything drastic. Start small. Let me spend time with her. Take her to the park or to dinner or wherever she likes. If you're uncomfortable, come along. I don't want to disrupt her routine. I just want to be part of it. Emily sighed, running a hand through her hair. As much as she wanted to resist, she knew he was right. This wasn't about her pride or her fears, it was about Lily. And if Daniel truly meant what he said, then keeping him away wouldn't be fair to her daughter. Fine, she said reluctantly. But we do this my way. No flashy gifts, no press, nothing that makes her feel like she's living in some fairy tale. She's a regular kid, and that's how I want her to stay. Daniel nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Fair enough, thank you, Emily. You have no idea how much this means to me. Their first outing together was awkward, to say the least. Emily insisted on coming along, partly to keep an eye on things and partly because she didn't trust Daniel completely yet. They met at a local park on a sunny Saturday morning, where Lily immediately brightened at the sight of Daniel waiting for them by the swings. Daddy, she exclaimed, running toward him with open arms. Daniel crouched down to meet her halfway, wrapping her in a tight hug. Emily watched from a distance, her heart aching with conflicting emotions. On one hand, seeing Lily so happy made her chest swell with warmth. On the other hand, watching Daniel step into the role she had fought so hard to fill left her feeling uneasy. They spent the afternoon playing together, pushing Lily on the swings, chasing her around the playground, and sharing ice cream cones while sitting on a bench. At first, Daniel seemed unsure of himself, fumbling over simple questions like which flavor Lily preferred or whether she liked dogs better than cats. But as the hours passed, he relaxed, laughing freely and engaging with his daughter in ways Emily hadn't expected. Watching them interact, Emily couldn't deny the bond forming between them. It was subtle but undeniable, a connection that went beyond bloodlines. Lily clung to Daniel's every word, her eyes lighting up whenever he spoke, while Daniel seemed genuinely fascinated by her quirks and interests. By the end of the day, even Emily found herself smiling despite her reservations. Over the next few weeks, Daniel became a regular presence in their lives. He took Lily to museums, zoos, and even introduced her to his world of luxury, albeit cautiously. One weekend, he invited them to his penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park. Emily hesitated at first, worried about exposing Lily to a lifestyle so different from their own. But Daniel assured her it was just a casual visit, nothing extravagant. As they stepped inside, Lily gasped in awe at the floor-to-ceiling windows and sprawling views of the city skyline. "Wow, Daddy, your house is like a castle," she exclaimed, twirling around in delight. "It's just a home," Daniel said with a chuckle, though Emily noticed the hint of pride in his voice. He gave them a tour, showing off the art collection lining the walls and the grand piano in the living room. When Lily asked if she could play it, Daniel hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Sure, why not?" Sitting beside her on the piano bench, he guided her tiny fingers over the keys, teaching her simple melodies. Emily stood nearby, watching silently as father and daughter laughed and created music together. In that moment, she realized something important. Daniel wasn't perfect, and neither was their situation. But for the first time, Lily had a chance to know her father, and maybe, just maybe, that was worth embracing. As the weeks turned into months, Daniel's presence in Lily's life grew stronger. He wasn't just a weekend visitor anymore. He was becoming an integral part of her world, and by extension, Emily's too. At first, Emily had been careful to keep their interactions limited and structured, always staying close by to ensure things went smoothly. But as time passed, she began to see that Daniel was genuinely committed to being a good father. His efforts weren't about showing off or making up for lost time in grand gestures. They were small, thoughtful actions that showed he cared. For instance, Daniel started learning about the little things that made Lily happy. He noticed how much she loved animals, so he took her to petting zoos and even arranged for her to visit a local horse stable. When she expressed interest in drawing, he bought her sketchbooks and art supplies, not expensive ones meant to impress, but practical tools that would last. On rainy days, they stayed indoors playing board games or baking cookies together in his kitchen. Slowly but surely, Daniel was building a bond with his daughter, one memory at a time. Emily found herself warming up to him, though it didn't happen overnight. There were still moments when doubt crept in, when she wondered if this new arrangement was too good to be true. What if Daniel decided he'd done enough? What if his busy schedule got in the way, leaving Lily disappointed? But every time those fears surfaced, Daniel proved her wrong. He adjusted his work commitments to prioritize family time, turning down late-night meetings and high-profile events without hesitation. For someone who had once seemed untouchable, he was surprisingly willing to put others first. But it wasn't just Lily who noticed the change. As Emily spent more time around Daniel, she began to see a side of him she hadn't expected. Beneath the polished exterior of the billionaire businessman was a man who carried his own share of regrets and insecurities. One evening, after Lily had fallen asleep during a movie night at his apartment, Daniel opened up to Emily in a way he never had before. "I've made a lot of mistakes," he admitted, staring out the window at the city lights below. "Not just with you and Lily, but in general. I've spent most of my life chasing success, thinking it would fill some kind of void. And now, looking back, I realize how empty it all feels compared to this, the chance to be a dad." Emily didn't know what to say at first. She had spent so long bracing herself for conflict or disappointment that hearing him speak so honestly caught her off guard. Finally, she replied, "It's not too late, you know. You're doing great with her. She adores you." Daniel smiled, faintly, though there was sadness in his eyes. "Thanks. That means a lot. But I owe you an apology too, Emily. If I'd known about Lily sooner, if I'd been there for you." He trailed off, shaking his head. "I can't change the past. All I can do is try to make things better now. For both of you." Emily nodded slowly, feeling a lump rise in her throat. She had carried the weight of single motherhood for so long that letting someone else share the burden felt strange, almost foreign. Yet as hard as it was to admit, having Daniel step up had lifted some of the pressure off her shoulders. For the first time in years, she wasn't constantly worrying about money or juggling multiple jobs to make ends meet. It wasn't just financial support either. It was knowing that Lily had someone else in her corner, someone who loved her unconditionally. Despite the progress they were making, challenges still arose. Balancing two very different lifestyles wasn't easy. While Daniel's penthouse offered breathtaking views and endless luxuries, Emily's modest apartment was cozy and familiar, a place where Lily felt safe and grounded. Emily worried that exposing her daughter to such extremes might confuse her or create unrealistic expectations. To Daniel's credit, he seemed aware of the potential pitfalls and worked hard to strike a balance. "You don't have to spoil her," Emily reminded him one day as they planned a trip to the aquarium. "She doesn't need designer clothes or fancy vacations. Just your time and attention, that's what matters most." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. I get it. Trust me, I'm not trying to buy her affection. I just want her to have opportunities. I never did growing up, but I'll respect your wishes. We'll take it slow. Their co-parenting dynamic evolved over time, becoming less adversarial and more collaborative. They established routines that worked for everyone. Weekly dinners at Daniel's place, weekend outings tailored to Lily's interests, and regular check-ins to discuss schedules and parenting decisions. Though they occasionally disagreed on everything from discipline strategies to screen time limits, they always managed to find common ground, putting Lily's well-being above their differences. What surprised Emily most, however, was the shift in her own feelings toward Daniel. At first, she had viewed him as an obstacle, a complication she hadn't asked for. But as they navigated the ups and downs of raising Lily together, she found herself seeing him in a new light. He was patient, kind, and surprisingly self-aware, qualities she hadn't expected from someone in his position. Their conversations grew longer and more personal, often spilling into laughter or shared stories about their childhoods. One evening, after tucking Lily into bed following a day at the beach, Daniel turned to Emily with a sheepish grin. You know, I used to think I had life figured out, he said. But meeting you and Lily has made me realize how much I still have to learn. Emily laughed softly, brushing sand off her jeans. Welcome to parenthood. It's messy, unpredictable, and exhausting, but also kind of amazing. Yeah, Daniel agreed, his gaze lingering on hers for a moment longer than necessary. Kind of amazing. Neither of them acknowledged the spark that passed between them in that moment, but it was there nonetheless. A quiet understanding that their relationship was changing in ways neither of them had anticipated. For now, they focused on Lily, cherishing the joy she brought into their lives. But deep down, both knew that something bigger was brewing, something neither of them was quite ready to confront yet. As the months rolled on, the bond between Daniel and Lily grew stronger with each passing day. He wasn't just her father anymore. He was her partner in crime, her confidant, and her biggest cheerleader. Emily watched from the sidelines as they laughed together over silly jokes, built pillow forts in his living room, and shared quiet moments reading bedtime stories. It was clear that Daniel had found a new purpose in life, one that didn't revolve around boardroom meetings or billion-dollar deals, but instead centered on the little girl who called him Dad. But it wasn't just Lily who noticed the change in him. Emily did too. The man she had once seen as cold and distant was now warm and approachable, someone she could talk to about anything without fear of judgment. Their conversations went beyond co-parenting logistics. They delved into dreams, fears, and hopes for the future. They talked about their childhoods, their struggles, and even their favorite foods. Slowly but surely, walls came down, and trust began to take root. One evening, after an impromptu dinner at Daniel's apartment, Emily stood by the window watching the city lights flicker below. Lily was fast asleep in the guest bedroom, exhausted from a long day of exploring the park. Daniel walked up beside her, handing her a cup of tea. "You've done an incredible job raising her," he said softly, breaking the silence. "I don't think I've ever told you that." Emily turned to look at him, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. "Thank you," she replied, her tone equally soft. "It hasn't been easy, but she makes it worth every challenge." Daniel nodded, his gaze lingering on hers. "She's lucky to have you, and honestly, so am I." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Emily broke the silence with a nervous laugh. "Well, let's not get carried away here. You're still learning how to braid hair properly." He chuckled, shaking his head. "True, but I'm getting better, right?" "Marginally," she teased, smiling despite herself. There was a pause, and then Daniel took a step closer, his expression serious. "Emily, I need to say something, and I hope you'll hear me out. When I first met you, well, technically, when Lily ran up to me, I thought my world was complicated enough. But meeting you both has changed everything. You've shown me what really matters, and I can't thank you enough for letting me be part of your lives." Emily felt her heart Skip a beat. She opened her mouth to respond, but Daniel continued before she could speak. I know we started off on rocky ground, and I'll never forgive myself for missing 6 years of Lily's life. But being here now, with both of you, it's made me realize how much I want this. Not just for Lily, but for us. I care about you, Emily. More than I ever expected to. Her breath caught in her throat. This was the last thing she had anticipated when she brought Lily to work that fateful day. She had been so focused on protecting her daughter and herself from potential heartache that she hadn't allowed herself to consider the possibility of something more. Yet here they were, standing inches apart, with emotions swirling in ways neither of them could ignore. I care about you too, she admitted finally, her voice barely above a whisper. But this is still so new, Daniel. We've been through so much already. I don't want to rush into anything and risk messing things up. For Lily's sake. Daniel nodded, understanding immediately. Of course. That's why I'm not asking for anything right now. Just, let's keep building what we have. Together. For all of us. From that day forward, their relationship shifted once again. Not dramatically, but subtly. They became not just co-parents, but partners in every sense of the word. Daniel continued to prioritize Lily, ensuring she felt loved and supported while respecting the boundaries Emily set. At the same time, he and Emily grew closer, finding comfort and joy in each other's company. Lily, for her part, thrived under their combined care. She blossomed into a confident, curious child who loved spending time with both her parents. Whether it was baking cookies with Daniel, painting pictures with Emily, or simply running around the park with both of them cheering her on, she radiated happiness. And seeing her smile filled Emily and Daniel with a sense of fulfillment they hadn't known was possible. One sunny afternoon, as they sat together on a picnic blanket in Central Park, Lily grabbed one of Emily's hands and one of Daniel's, pulling them toward her. I love you, Mommy, she said, hugging Emily tightly. Then she turned to Daniel and added, and I love you too, Daddy. Tears welled up in Emily's eyes as she glanced at Daniel, who looked equally moved. In that moment, surrounded by laughter, love, and the simple beauty of family, they realized something important. Life doesn't always go as planned, but sometimes the unexpected turns out to be exactly what you needed all along. And for Emily, Daniel and Lily, that unexpected gift had become the foundation of a new beginning, one filled with hope, healing, and endless possibilities.